these works a fascination that was never to be equaled afterwards with creating intricate spatial schemes, spaces beyond spaces. I've already talked about that in the double screen painting and the Gu Hongzheng, Han Xizai's Night Banquet, and so on. Places to be probed visually in a way that will reward such exploration. I suspect that the Han Xizai picture in the original, which we don't have, offered such enticements to explore, even more than the painting does now, and that the double screen picture had that kind of effect. And certainly the Zhao Gan scroll still encourages it. It doesn't have hidden spaces, but it certainly encourages you to look and find more and more and more. I refer to the invitations that this kind of painting offers, which would never be done again with the same success, as the more you look, the more you find. And that's sort of the theme of what follows. Okay, what we're looking at is an anonymous painting from the Liao dynasty. This painting, I'll talk about Liao again toward the end of this lecture. This painting, which represents a Taoist retreat in the mountains, a hanging scroll that was found in a Liao dynasty tomb near Shenyang in the northeast, and is kept in the Liaoning Museum. It can be dated to somewhere around 950 to 980 or something like that. The subject of the landscape is not entirely clear from the publication of it, but to most of us when we saw this painting in our 1977 delegation trip. But Wai Gam Ho, who was along, I've spoken often of him, Wai Gam Ho recognized it immediately as a Taoist paradise, that is the mythical place where a person, a man, goes upon death, if he's fortunate, that is, and goes to go like going to heaven. And let's see, then here, let's go back to this. Very, very quickly, the painting represents a Taoist paradise in which you enter down here in the sort of lower right, the red mark, a gate, also details of all this, and you make your way up to a terrace up on the upper left here, where you see two people playing Wei Qi, this board game, with another watching, and then you see the palaces of paradise behind. Well, I'll show details of all this, and you have to follow the whole going in, making your way up, enjoying it, and then sort of moving around behind the mountain, a whole kind of route that's laid out for you by the artist. Okay, now the subject, as I say, was identified immediately by Wai Gam, and then later I found other examples of it from a later time, which sort of bore out what he said. Now here, the next please. This is a woodblock print after a design by an artist named Ding Yunpeng. The Yunpeng is in a seal here on the left. And it represents very much the same kind of scene. It's taken from a book of ink cake designs. That is ink cakes, a solid, which you rub to make ink. And a early 17th century maker of ink cakes, a Cheng family, put out this book, 1604, Cheng Shi Mo Yuan, Garden of Ink Cakes, and got Ding Yunpeng and others to do pictures for it, which were designs that were impressed on his ink cakes, presumably. Okay, now here you see this, in this woodblock print, you see the same scene, essentially. Here is a single figure, without an attendant, that is, making a way across a plank bridge over a stream and into a pine forest, then through a kind of tunnel-like passage to come out, presumably, up here on the upper right, where you see two figures that are sitting at a game board and another watching on a terrace. And then above that, and to the left, you see the palaces of paradise, where all the immortals live when they come to the Taoist paradise. And then beyond that, you see mountains. Okay, it's very much the same composition as the other. Then, just as it happened, another version of the same, essentially the same design, same subject, turned up at an auction of the time. And I was able to photograph it and make details. It's a little painting, fairly small, can't have been more than a foot or so wide, and maybe 17th century in date or a little bit earlier, doesn't matter. It must have been preserved in Japan, because the Japanese use this kind of bright gold design brocades to mount paintings that are not especially prestigious or high class or whatever anyway. So And this is a later version of the same subject. Two figures down here, one of them sort of pointing the way to the other. I'll have details in a minute. And they again pass through trees, pine trees and others. Lots of clouds around, clouds of paradise. And then they make their way by a passage not seen up to a terrace here in the upper right. Here with a railing. And here again, two figures playing Wei Qi. And then above, the palaces of paradise. The next, let's go on with the detail. Here close up. Well, this is a late example of the blue and green style. We saw the beginnings of that, or a form of it, in the Tang Dynasty, in the works, the Emperor Ming Huang's Journey to Shu, and the landscape attributed to Zhang Ziqian. By this time, that is probably 17th century, maybe 18th, it's become a very formal way of painting in an archaistic style. And it's used for auspicious pictures like this, and all kinds of others that are auspicious or archaistic paintings. The hard-edged clouds, of course, are very old-fashioned. By this time, they had mastered long ago the way of representing believable space. This is not a very important painting, but it does show, and I think this is important, how a pictorial structure can be transmitted over the centuries without a lot of change, especially one that has a quasi-religious function like this one. Just as we were about to post this lecture as finished, someone wrote me about a painting her parents had acquired 30 years ago, sending photographs asking my opinion of it. It has a fake signature of the famous Ming master Tang Lin and fake imperial seals. It's really by some minor 18th century artist, I think. But interestingly, it's another example of more or less the same theme. The entrance in lower right into a kind of cave passage. Next, please. A place where the new arrival joins others in entering the palaces of paradise, or so I believe them to be. And next, please. Up above, the terrace with two people seated at a table, with another watching, except that here the Wei Qi board has been replaced by things to eat and drink. Somebody should do a serious study of these pictures and try to find out what their purpose and use was. To wish people longevity and a safe entry into paradise, something like that, I would assume. Okay, that's it. Now here's the painting again, and this is a slide made from the original. I should point out here that the heavy blue and green colors associated with paradise scenes are here limited to the distant peaks in middle right and upper left, and maybe and some blue color in the upper left. This artist prefers to do most of his painting, that is, in ink monochrome. Now you enter the scroll at the bottom between land masses that are kind of concave. You can see them here. And then between groups of pine trees. And then make your way back to the sort of middle distance, a little bit below. And then you see what I'll have in the next detail. The detail. Now here we are up close. And you see the man, the recently deceased, who's making his way into paradise, accompanied here by two servants. One of them carrying a long thing, maybe a chin of a musical instrument, the other carrying a jug of wine, so he would be well fixed in paradise. And here you see, beyond him, a kind of entry hall making an opening onto, or going toward a stairway that makes its way up to the proper terraces and palaces of paradise. And here you see already the painting of the landscape around it. This is extremely valuable to us for showing 10th century landscape painting. The artist is able to, using this technique of shading with rather indistinct brush strokes. It's not yet a system of repeated strokes, so-called sun or texture strokes. It's just rough, loose brush strokes which shade from one contour to another. And by this means, he's also able to create concave forms, which we saw already something like it in the Biwa painting from Shouso-in on the Tang Dynasty. That is concavities and bluffs, or overhanging bluffs. Okay, and he goes between these into this entryway. Here is the figure of the man up close. The man always the larger figure, wearing a cap, carrying a cane, indicating his age, and the two servants, one of them with a huge wine gourd, pot, really, of some kind. And the other carrying, as I say, what probably is going to be a chin or a musical instrument. That's all he needs in paradise. His other needs will be taken care of. Next, please. Here is one of the landscape masses, the earth masses, seen up close. And as I say, this is very valuable for showing us reliably what five dynasties, how mountain forms and earth forms and earth banks and such were painted in the five dynasties. This was, as I say, before the development of texture stroke system. But it's very effective in shaping the forms and giving them volume and giving them a certain tangible surface, a certain texture. The rock, the two of them here, pushing in different directions here in the foreground, and ink washes to take us back. Okay, the next please. Then as you move upward in this picture, what we see in the lower right is the roof of this entry hall, and then so we're moving upward. We're not seeing the stairway by which he climbs to the upper part, but we're seeing the railing. It appears, a little bit of it appears red. You can see it. See, the red stands out in this otherwise largely ink monochrome landscape, and the red here is connected to a bit of red in the upper left, because the railing, the stairway and the railing reemerge behind this great overhanging cliff with pine trees growing on it. It reemerges and can be seen slightly. So we were given a kind of visual connection, allowing us to imagine moving up the stairway through a kind of passageway or ravine maybe to get to the upper section. And then once we're up there, what we see is here's the upper section now. Pine trees. You can see here in the very middle, or a little below the middle of the painting, that reemergence of the red railing, which connects us with the entry down below. And then here we see the terrace, very much like the ones in the much later pictures I showed, with the two old men playing Wei Qi, and then a third standing in this case beside them. And then behind it are the palaces of paradise, zigzagging around and disappearing actually behind the main mountain, as though you can still follow around, as though you explore, you keep going. You can look through a gate in this walkway and see the roots of pine trees beyond. See right here, it's a structure in red, but you see there's an opening here, and you can move through it and go beyond. So it is, again, the kind of composition that sort of gives you, the more you look, the more you see. And then this zigzagging around behind the mountain takes you still further around and sort of promises, if only we go around this mountain, there's still more, and so on. Here up close is the detail of the two figures playing Wei Qi, which is the kind of ideal game. People in paradise scenes spend their time playing Wei Qi. I don't know what it would be in our society, probably golf. Rich guys seem to like to play golf. So there would be golf courses in paradise. That would be a little hard to represent, but there we are. And then another character beside them standing. Anyway, okay. The painting has suffered some, but it's in pretty good condition for its age, and anyway, we're very fortunate to have it. And then here's a detail of the walkway, covered walkway, sort of making its way around and zigzagging behind the mountain. Up above the mountain, with the mountain itself, it has a projection from it on the right, a strange kind of dog's head-like projection. Probably some geological reality behind it. I don't know what it would be. At any rate, we find dog's head projections like this in paintings of the Yuan dynasty, maybe 14th century and so on.